What are the prophecies that are being fulfilled and that would indicate that the warning is near? The decisive intervention of heaven to reform the world, which will begin with the warning, will happen with or without the explicit support of the hierarchy of the church. There is no need to fear. Whether the hierarchy believes in the Marian prophecies or not, it will happen because God writes straight on crooked lines and will put the hierarchy in situation where the decisions it makes lead to it. And we are already seeing how God is leading us towards it, almost imperceivably for some who do not understand how God leads us. Here we will talk about the prophecies that will lead us to the warning prophesied in Garbandal that has already been fulfilled, and how it is happening despite the fact that a few months ago it would have been unthinkable for it to happen now, and how the world is also acquiring a physiognomy aligned with the warning. Today, we may have the feeling that the pieces fit more than before because we can see it, but they always fit, although it was hidden from our perceptions. Throughout history, it has been clear that God writes straight on crooked lines. And what does this actually mean? That the wrong things that even the church does not alter the divine plan, but rather God uses them properly to advance the kingdom. We can say that with or without the support of the popes, the divine plan is fulfilled, and with the church as the center. The church is a divine and human institution, holy and sinful at the same time. It is holy because it receives guidance from God, and sinful because it is made up and directed by men who often sin against the commandments, and in many cases do not comply with divine orders. But somehow, God always manages to bring good out of evil. Human disobedience in the church inevitably occurs because the devil's goal has always been to tempt and corrupt its central figures and priests in general. That is why we, Catholics, are not apologars. We do not assume that everything a pope says is holy, because he can be wrong, although we respect him. Even in the periods of greatest upheaval in the church, God's plan was carried out, regardless of whether we are dealing with a good, average, or bad pope. And we have seen it at this moment when Francis, a pontiff that many Catholics do not consider a legitimate pope, a discussion that is irrelevant now, managed to fulfill the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary closer to what the Virgin. He may have flaws in this operation, but at least he named Russia and called all the bishops to join him in the consecration. A pontiff who has surrounded himself with the most modernist cardinals and bishops of the church and left aside those with more traditional doctrine, who has said many contradictory things in his pontificate, nevertheless fulfilled the prophecy. And not by his merit, but by divine design, because it was prophesied and God writes straight on crooked lines. It is that the person responsible for leading the church could not do anything else reasonable in the face of the war situation. And what was the prophecy? The stigmatized Antonio Ruffini, who died in 1999, had an apparition of the Blessed Virgin in a fountain on the Via Appia in Rome. On August 12, 1951, when he was returning from work in an old car, he became unbearably thirsty. He went in search of a fountain, and there he found a barefoot woman covered with a black cloak, who he thought was a local peasant woman who had come for a drink. She brought him a bowl to drink from, and when he finished, the water turned to blood, which stupefied him, and he did not immediately understand. She smiled at him and immediately began to talk to him about God and his love for men. He was surprised to hear the truly sublime words, in particular those referring to the sacrifice of the cross. And when the vision departed, Riffini, moved and delighted, walked towards his car, but when he tried to start, he noticed that on the backs and on the palms of his hands were large bubbles of reddish blood that sprouted as if he were bleeding. There began the stigmata of Christ that he had for 40 years. Pius XII would later authorize the blessing of a chapel at that place where Ruffini received the stigmata on the Via Appia. Ruffini's contact with the supernatural world continued over the years, but he was always secretive about his apparitions. In the early 1990s, Riffini was asked, "Is John Paul II the Pope who is going to do the consecration to Russia?" He replied, "No, it is not Juan Pablo. He will not be his immediate successor either, but his later one. He is the one who will consecrate Russia." We know that what we are saying is not going to satisfy people who are focusing on Francis being a false pope, or those who think that he is one of the best popes of recent times. But someone has to speak sensibly. God makes the church fulfill the important issues and in due time, regardless of the pope, good, average, or bad. It seems that this war is going to put Francis, in spite of everything, once again in the front of fulfilling other prophecies that brings us closer to the warning, that is, the decisive intervention of God to purify the world. Francis scrapped the meeting with Patriarch Kirill, the leader of the Russian Orthodoxy, and is now aiming to meet with President Putin. He asked for a meeting and would travel to Russia when it was granted. And there is a prophecy of Garabandal, which says that after the return of a pope from a trip to Russia, the most important events of the end times will be unleashed. Albrecht Weber's book on the apparitions of the Virgin of Garabandal contains a statement attributed to Conchita Gonzalez, one of the four seers of Garabandal. She expressed what the Virgin told her. The Pope will go to Russia, Moscow. When he returns to the Vatican, hostilities will soon break out in different parts of Europe. And how is this related to the warning? Conchita told Weber that when communism comes again, events will happen. And Marie Loli, the deceased Garabandal seer, told Father Benak, "Our Lady often spoke about communism. She said that there will be a time when communism would seem to be all over the world." I think that was when he told us that the priest would have a hard time celebrating Mass and talking about God and divine things. And he added that some priests who are communists will create confusion so that people don't know what is right and what is wrong, and how we can interpret the word communism in this case. And are we close to communism dominating the world? In the 1960s, to speak of communism was to speak of Russia, because China had not yet become a power, despite already being communist, and the errors of communism had not metastasized in the West. Today, there is formally only one great communist power, which is China. However, Russia, although it began its re-Christianization, has not totally got rid of the typical autocratic communist form of government, and further supports all governments that identify with communism, such as Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. And on the other hand, cultural Marxism has been firmly installed in the West, promoting atheism and taking the class struggle not only to the relationship between bosses and workers, as Marx thought. Rather, it extended to the institutions such as the family, the relationship between the sexes, between races, between natives of the countries and immigrants, etc. And in turn, the great restart of the world proposed by the World Economic Forum, which starts from the West, is clearly communist in nature, because it proposes a type of Chinese-type world government under the motto, "You will have nothing, but you will be happy." Where an elite will rule, there will be no middle class, and the economy will run by large multinational companies. So today, we can already say that technically communism is already almost installed in the world through any of these ways. Although greater visibility of that may be lacking, the trigger may be the trip of a pope to Moscow. Conchita said that the warning will come when communism dominates the world, and Marie Loli added that the warning will come when the Holy Mass can no longer be freely celebrated, and that will be the moment in which the world will most need divine intervention. And when the warning arrives, we will already be with the bow set towards the triumph of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, because the Church began to understand the importance of Mary in these end times and consecrated Russia to her heart, hoping that she would become a nation, punisher of that world that brings the world back to God, which for some would already be happening. Well, up to here, what we are wanting to talk about is how what will happen in the Church will directly or indirectly lead to the warning. And I'd like to ask you, if you have seen cases where God has taken advantage of bad things and turned them into good,